Summer had just begun, and I was spending some time at my dad's house in the countryside. Having recently completed my second year of college, I felt I could use a break. The woods behind the house had always served as my sanctuary, a quiet and tranquil space to clear my mind. This day began just like any other, and I had no clue how drastically things would shift by the time it ended. My stepmother, Samantha, was 59, but you wouldn't guess it from her appearance. She was sharp-minded, self-reliant, and had a natural ability to draw attention without even trying. She married my dad a few years after he lost my mom. While they seemed happy together, there was always an odd sense of distance between us. It wasn't that we clashed. There was just something about her that I couldn't quite identify. That morning, I woke up early to go for a hike. The sun was warm, and the forest was alive with birdsong and rustling leaves. It was absolutely perfect. I ventured deeper into the woods, following a familiar path until I arrived at a small clearing where I liked to sit and reflect. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, startled to see Samantha standing there with her hands in her pockets and a small smile on her face. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. I shrugged, trying to sound nonchalant, but my heart started to race. "Sure, if you want." She moved closer, her gaze wandering among the trees before landing on me. "I needed some fresh air," she said, settling down next to me on a fallen log. "You always seem to know the best spots." I chuckled nervously. "Yeah, I suppose I've spent a lot of time out here." We sat quietly for a while, just listening to the sounds of the forest. However, something felt off today. Samantha wasn't the calm, collected woman I usually saw at home. There was a palpable tension building between us. Eventually, she broke the silence. "You know, Alex, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," she said, her voice low and almost hesitant. "About us." I frowned, uncertain of where this was heading. "Us? Yeah," she replied, looking directly at me. Her eyes held an intensity one hadn't noticed before. "About how things have been between us since I married your dad. We've never really connected, have we?" I shifted uncomfortably. "Well, it's not like we've had any issues." She gently interrupted me, shaking her head. No problems, but there's been this distance. I can feel it. Lately, I've been wondering why." I didn't know how to respond. Samantha had always felt somewhat distant, but I assumed it was because she didn't want to overstep her boundaries as my stepmom. Now, sitting there in the woods, her words felt like a question hanging in the air, demanding an answer. "I don't know," I finally admitted. "I guess I just thought you didn't really care." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Alex, I've always cared, but I didn't know how to reach out to you." She paused, placing her hand over mine. "I feel like we've missed something." I glanced down at her hand, warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the summer sun. I should have pulled away, but I stayed still, staring at her, my mind racing. What was she trying to convey? "You're not a kid anymore," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've grown up. I see that now." Her words jolted me, and before I could stop myself, I blurted out, "What are you saying, Samantha?" She smiled, but it wasn't the reassuring smile I was accustomed to. Felt softer, more intimate. "I'm saying that maybe we don't have to keep pretending there's nothing between us." I froze, unsure if I had heard her correctly. "Claire, we can't." But she didn't pull back. Instead, she leaned in closer, her eyes fixed on mine. "Why not?" she whispered, her breath warm against my skin. "We both feel it. You can't deny that." I was at a loss for words. I had sensed it too. The strange tension, the way her presence always seemed to affect me more than it should. But I never imagined she would acknowledge it, let alone act on it. She closed the gap between us, pressing her lips to mine. The kiss was soft and tentative at first, as if she were testing the waters. But as I responded, it deepened into something more urgent, more real. Everything else faded away. The trees, the birds, even the guilt. It was just Samantha and me, caught in a moment that felt both wrong and unavoidable. Her hands cradled my face, pulling me closer, and I found myself responding instinctively, without questioning what this meant. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless, our foreheads resting against each other. "We can't keep doing this," I said, my voice trembling. She smiled again, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "I know," she whispered, "but I also know we can't ignore it any longer." I nodded, my thoughts still swirling. I had no idea what the future would bring or how we were going to navigate this newfound reality. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to pretend that this moment hadn't occurred. "We'll figure it out," I murmured softly. Samantha slowly stood up, brushing the dirt off her dress, her demeanor now more composed. "We'll take it one step at a time. But we need to be cautious, Alex." I nodded in agreement. "Yeah, we will." As we made our way back through the woods, the atmosphere between us crackled with something new. An unspoken bond that neither of us had anticipated but couldn't ignore. There was no going back now. Whatever lay ahead, we would tackle it together. For the time being, it was enough to acknowledge what had been bubbling beneath the surface for so long. We didn't have all the answers, but we had time. And, for the first time, we had each other as we walked toward the house. The trees seemed to close in around us, creating a barrier from the outside world. Everything felt heightened. The sounds of the birds, the gentle breeze rustling the leaves, and the tension that lingered between Samantha and me. My mind was still grappling with what had just transpired. But strangely, it didn't feel wrong. Felt like it was meant to be. When we reached the edge of the woods, Samantha paused and turned to face me. Her expression was calm, but her eyes still burned with intensity. "Alex," she said softly, "we can't let this spiral out of control." I nodded, fully aware of what she meant. "I don't want to complicate things for you or for Dad." She smiled faintly, reaching out to touch my arm. "It's complicated, but we need to take our time figuring this out. We don't have to make any decisions right now, but we have to be careful." Her words carried weight, yet I sensed a mutual understanding between us. Neither of us had anticipated this situation. However, now that it had unfolded, there was no point in pretending we could revert to how things used to be. We both understood that ignoring this would only make matters worse. "I'll follow your lead," I said quietly, my heart still racing. "We'll take it one step at a time." Samantha nodded, her eyes softening. "That's all we can do." She took a deep breath and offered me a small, reassuring smile. "But for now, let's keep this between us. Okay? Your dad doesn't need to know anything until we sort it out." "Of course," I replied, my voice steady. "It's our secret." We stood there for a moment longer, the sounds of the woods fading into the background as we shared a glance. The intensity of the kiss hung in the air, but there was something else too. A sense of calm, more grounded. We were no longer just two people skirting around an unspoken connection. Now we both understood our position, even if we didn't have all the answers. Finally, Samantha broke the moment, turning toward the house. "We should head back," she said, her tone lighter now. "Your dad will wonder where we've been." As we walked side by side, the tension between us began to dissipate. Samantha appeared more at ease, and I felt a strange relief wash over me. There were still many questions, so many, but for the first time I wasn't anxious about what might happen next. When we reached the house, my dad was in the kitchen, cooking dinner. He turned as we entered, smiling warmly. "You two were gone for a while. Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "Just went for a walk." "The woods are beautiful this time of year," Samantha chimed in smoothly. "We just lost track of time." My dad laughed. "Well, I'm glad you're back. Dinner will be ready soon." We exchanged glances, and Samantha gave me a quick, nearly imperceptible nod, signaling that everything was fine. In that moment, I realized that we would be okay. Over the next few weeks, things between Samantha and me remained quiet. We didn't rush into anything and made sure to keep everything as normal as possible around my dad. There were moments of lingering glances and brief touches that reminded me of our time in the woods, but we maintained our distance, careful not to let things escalate too quickly. Yet we didn't avoid each other. In fact, Samantha and I began to communicate more, getting to know each other in ways we hadn't before. An honesty blossomed between us that hadn't existed prior to that day in the woods, and as unusual as it felt, it was also comforting. One evening, after my dad had gone to bed, Samantha and I found ourselves alone on the back porch. The night was warm, and the stars twinkled brightly overhead. We sat in comfortable silence for a while before she finally spoke. "Alex, I've been thinking a lot about what happened," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the sky. "I don't regret it, but I want to ensure that whatever happens next, we're both on the same page." I glanced at her, the moonlight casting a gentle glow on her face. "I feel the same way," I replied. "I don't regret it either, but we need to be cautious. We should take our time." She smiled, turning to face me. "I'm glad you said that. I just don't want to rush into something that could hurt us or your dad." I reached out, taking her hand and giving it a gentle squeeze. "We'll figure it out together. No rush." Samantha smiled, and for the first time, I felt like we were both on solid ground. There was no need to hurry, no need to force anything. We had time to understand what this meant for both of us and for my dad. In the weeks and months that followed, Samantha and I grew closer, but we kept things respectful and discreet. We knew the risks involved, but we also recognized that what we shared was genuine. We took our time, allowing our connection to unfold naturally, and eventually found a way to be present in each other's lives that felt right. It wasn't always easy, but it was honest. And in the end, that was what mattered most.